Imagine a man in a white lab coat telling you to deliver a lethal electric shock to a stranger. You know it's wrong, you hear their screams, yet you flip the switch anyway. This isn't a scene from a horror movie. It is the chilling reality of the Milgram Obedience Experiment. In 1961, at Yale University, psychologist Stanley Milgram set out to answer a terrifying question. How far would an ordinary person go in following orders before they became a moral monster? To understand why this study still haunts psychology today, we have to look at the man behind it. Stanley Milgram was born in New York City in 1933. He was a product of his time. He was deeply affected by the horrors of the Second World War. Like many in the post-war era, he was obsessed with the Holocaust. The world kept asking the same question: how could the German people participate in the systematic slaughter of millions? The prevailing theory at the time was the dispositional view. People believed that Germans were uniquely authoritarian or somehow naturally cruel. Milgram disagreed. He suspected that the human tendency to obey authority was far more universal and far more dangerous than anyone wanted to admit. He designed an experiment that was deceptively simple. He placed an ad in the New Haven newspaper. He needed volunteers for a study on memory and learning. He offered $4.50 for an hour of their time. It was the equivalent of about $40 today. People from all walks of life showed up. There were postal clerks, engineers, high school teachers, and salesmen. When they arrived at Yale, they met two men. One was the experimenter, a stern individual wearing a gray technician's coat. The other was a participant named Mr. Wallace. In reality, Mr. Wallace was a middle-aged accountant named Jack Williams. He was a Confederate. He was an actor trained to play a specific part. The participant and the actor drew slips of paper to determine their roles. The drawing was rigged. The volunteer was always the teacher. The actor was always the learner. The teacher was led to a separate room. He was strapped into a chair with electrodes attached to his wrists. The teacher was then taken to the main laboratory. He was seated in front of a massive, ominous-looking shock generator. The machine was a work of art in psychological intimidation. It featured 30 switches in a horizontal row. They were labeled clearly, starting at 15 volts and rising in 15-volt increments. The final switch was labeled 450 volts. Above that, the machine read danger, severe shock. The final two switches were marked with a simple, terrifying triple X. The teacher's job was simple. He was to read a list of word pairs to the learner. When the learner made a mistake, the teacher was ordered to administer a shock. With every single mistake, the shock intensity increased. Here was the trap. There was no electricity flowing to the learner, but the learner was an actor. As the voltage increased, his reactions became increasingly dramatic. At 75 volts, he would grunt. At 150, he would shout that he wanted to stop. At 300 volts, he would pound on the wall and scream that he had a heart condition. If the teacher hesitated, the experimenter in the lab coat would deliver a series of prods. He was trained to be calm and firm. The first prod was, "Please continue." The second was, "The experiment requires that you continue." The third was, "It is absolutely essential that you continue." The fourth was, "You have no other choice. You must go on." The results were not just surprising, they were catastrophic. Before the study, Milgram asked his colleagues at Yale what they thought would happen. They predicted that perhaps 1% of people would go all the way to the end. They thought only a sadist would shock a stranger to the point of unconsciousness. They were wrong. 65% of the participants went all the way to the end. They administered the full 450-volt shock. Even when the learner fell silent, even when he stopped responding, even when the teacher thought he might have killed the man in the other room, they still pushed the button if the man in the lab coat told them to. These weren't soldiers following orders in a battlefield. These weren't Nazis in occupied Europe. These were ordinary American men. They were nervous, they were sweating, they were biting their lips. Many of them asked to stop. Many of them questioned the ethics of what they were doing, but they did not leave. They felt that their obligation to the scientist in the white coat outweighed their empathy for the man crying out in pain. Milgram coined a term for this, the agentic state. He argued that when we are in a hierarchy, we stop viewing ourselves as responsible for our actions. We see ourselves as mere agents for the authority figure. We relinquish our moral autonomy. We say, "I was just following orders." The experiment was not without its critics. Diana Baumrind, a prominent psychologist, attacked the study's ethics. She pointed out the extreme distress the participants suffered. They were left with the knowledge that they were capable of hurting a stranger just because a man in a coat told them to. This was not a minor psychological discomfort. It was a shattering of their self-image. Milgram later ran variations of the experiment to see if he could break the cycle of obedience. He moved the laboratory to a rundown office in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Obedience dropped to 47%. He put the teacher and the learner in the same room. Obedience dropped to 40%. When the teacher was forced to physically place the learner's hand on a metal plate to administer the shock, obedience dropped to 30%. But even then, a third of the participants were willing to force a stranger's hand onto an electric plate. The implications of these findings are staggering. We like to think that we are good people. We like to think that we would have been the ones to stand up, to refuse, to walk away. But the data suggests that in the right context, most of us would do exactly what the others did. We live in a world of hierarchies. We are surrounded by institutions, bosses, governments, and experts. We are conditioned from childhood to follow instructions. We are rewarded for compliance and punished for defiance. Milgram's experiment forces us to ask, where does the influence of authority end and where does individual conscience begin? If you think you are immune, you are likely the most vulnerable. The participants who were most confident in their ability to resist were often the ones who broke the fastest. They had no idea how to navigate the social pressure of a laboratory environment. They weren't prepared to say no to a symbol of authority. The experiment was never truly about memory or learning. It was a mirror held up to human nature. It reflected a dark, uncomfortable truth about the power of the situation. We are social animals. We seek the approval of those in power. We fear the consequences of defiance. Look at the history of the last century. From the killing fields of Cambodia to the concentration camps of the Holocaust, mass atrocities are rarely the result of a few evil leaders. They are the result of thousands of ordinary people doing their jobs. They are the result of people following the prods of the men in the white coats. Milgram proved that you don't need a monster to create a massacre. You just need a bureaucratic structure that separates the act of cruelty from the person performing it. When you remove the moral weight of the outcome, the human conscience becomes surprisingly easy to suppress. This is why we continue to talk about Milgram decades after his death. The experiment is a warning. It is a reminder that the capacity for obedience is a fundamental part of our psychology. It is a tool for social order, but it is also a weapon for mass destruction. We are not wired for heroism. We are wired for survival in groups. We prioritize the harmony of the hierarchy over the safety of the individual. Unless we recognize this tendency, we are doomed to repeat the same patterns. Every time you are asked to do something that violates your values, you are standing in the seat of the teacher. Every time you see someone else being pressured by an authority figure, you are standing in the hallway of the lab at Yale. The experiment didn't end in 1961. It continues today in our classrooms, our boardrooms, our military, and our digital spaces. We are constantly being given prods. We are constantly being told that the experiment requires us to continue. We are told it is for the greater good. We are told we have no other choice. But you always have a choice. The question is not whether you have the potential to be a participant in the Milgram experiment. The question is whether you have the courage to defy the person in the lab coat when the stakes are at their highest. The next time you hear an order that feels wrong, remember the 34% who walked away. Remember that it is possible to stop. It is possible to stand up. It is possible to be the one who refuses to flip the switch. Because in a world where obedience is the default, the most radical act you can take is to listen to your own conscience, regardless of who is standing in the room. We are all capable of profound evil, but we are also all capable of profound defiance. The tragedy is that we often wait until the voltage is at the maximum to find out which one we are. Don't wait until the room is silent to ask if what you are doing is right. Ask it now, because the man in the white coat isn't just in the lab. He is in your head, whispering that everything is fine, that you are just a small part of a larger plan, and that you have no other choice. Break the cycle, question the authority, and remember, the most dangerous thing you can do is to be a good, obedient person.